Before Ballpit, developer Kenny Sun actually released another critically acclaimed video game, but most of you have probably never heard of it. In 2023, under the publisher Raw Fury, Kenny Sun released Mr. Sun's Hatbox. In this video, I'm going to deep dive into the design of this game to pick out any clear examples of how Sun took lessons learnt from Mr. Sun's Hatbox and used those findings to create Ballpit, with the goal being to create a game that had at least as much critical acclaim, but maybe more commercial success. So let's start off with a quick synopsis of Mr. Sun's Hatbox. The player starts off with being introduced to a courier which is delivering a box, presumably containing a hat, to Mr. Sun. Before Mr. Sun can receive the package, again what can only be presumed as a gaggle of bandits takes that box and runs away. As Mr. Sun signed up for the Super Deluxe Protection package, it is your duty to get the box back at all costs. In terms of the actual game, it's actually quite interesting. On the surface, it's a 2D side-on dungeon crawler, but it's actually way more inspired by games like Gears of War or Mark of the Ninja, as stealth is very much at the center of the minute-to-minute gameplay. The goal though, like you would expect, is to start a run and get to the end of the run. During the run, you have a goal, which is to either kill or capture all enemies, or just a specific enemy, or maybe you're just trying to find an item. And the way you do this is kinda up to you. You can lure enemies into traps, bounce on their head to remove their helmet, or if they aren't wearing one, just knock them out. You can throw objects, pick up weapons from enemies or from chests. The point here is that it's a really diverse sandbox of tools you can use to really tackle situations however you want. Once you finish your first run, and of course unsuccessfully capture the box for Mr. Sun, you ask to set up a base in his basement. This is where base building comes in. You place rooms down and you can assign workers to either research or be healed, and there's even a brig for all your captured enemies and the storeroom for all your captured items. This is the real first inkling of similarity between Mr. Sun's Hatbox and Ballpit, as they both have base building, but I think this is also the easiest example of how we can see a lesson learnt and improvement. Basically, the base building in Mr. Sun lacks one key thing. There is no usage of the core mechanics the player uses in runs when base building. A lot of the other systems are there with regards to synergies and upgrades, but the fact that in Ballpit you actually fire your workers like balls is just one example of synergizing the design across two areas of the game. I also think it's just really interesting that the reaction to the base building in Ballpit was like, oh my god, I can't believe this game has base building as well, when this wasn't Kenny Sun's first rodeo with bolting on an entire base building game onto a game he already made. And he was clearly a fan of the idea, it just needed tightening up. When going into an actual run, we can see another similarity. For each run you must choose a character to embark on the run with, very similar to Ballpit. However, there are a few key differences here when comparing to Ballpit. In Mr. Sun's Hatbox, when you pick a character, you are presented with all of their quirks. However, the difference in Ballpit is that the majority of the quirks are positive, or more so just the character's toolkit at the very least. In Mr. Sun's Hatbox, there are some positives to the characters, but mainly negatives you have to deal with. This is a small but very important difference. Clearly, the design principles considered with the character design of Mr. Sun's Hatbox was first variety, as there are infinitely more characters in this game than there are in Ballpit, because they aren't bespoke designed. But secondly, it's clear that the player is supposed to weigh up the negatives first and foremost with the characters in Mr. Sun's Hatbox, but in Ballpit they are supposed to weigh up the positives and how to get more out of the characters with the items they find in runs. This is a classic example of switching up the mindset of the player from pain avoidance to pleasure seeking. In Mr. Sun's Hatbox, the player is trying to make the best of seemingly a bad situation, especially at the beginning of the game, whilst in Ballpit they are trying to seek how to improve a good kit, or at the very least a perceived neutral kit. Finally, the big difference with the characters themselves is that this game also has an extraction mechanic. When going into a run, you are warned that if you die with the character you have chosen, themselves as well as the loot you found in the run and the loot assigned to them from storage are lost permanently. Now, don't get me wrong, this is very cool and works really well for the game. I'm not trying to say it's bad, but with so many similarities between the games, we need to look at why this isn't the case for Ballpit. So first off, there's a change between generated and bespoke character design. In Ballpit, because every character is bespoke, it's just a terrible idea to have them lost permanently if the player fails. It just doesn't make sense. But that is assuming that the design for bespoke characters was made early on in development for Ballpit. If we assume that isn't the case, then there is another huge reason as to why permadeath wasn't included in Ballpit. In both games, character progression is huge. It's one of the key motivators for the player, and one of the main ways players can naturally progress further in the game. So, to make Ballpit less prickly and less hardcore, resulting in a wider scope for potential commercial success, The design change made to keep the same character progression, but remove the chance for the player to lose that progression, was a great decision. This right here is one of the core examples of changes made from one game to another, which feels very much like a commercial decision, which is great for the assumed goal of Kenny Sun. One final thing I want to talk about runs in particular before we move on to one final aspect of the game is that the progression through the story is very similar, but just presented differently. In Mr. Sun's Hatbox, the player has to complete an increasing number of non-progression missions before they get the opportunity to progress the story. In Ballpit, the player must get an increasing amount of gears before they can progress to the next level. This is essentially exactly the same, but the key difference here is that the number of missions required to get to the story mission in Mr. Sun's Hatbox is not presented to the player, whilst in Ballpit it is. This is a clear example of Sun addressing a concern with regards to feedback to the player, making sure that they know and get confirmation that whenever they make progress towards the goal, they just know about it. Finally, we have the biggest change, the core gameplay. I'm not going to go into crazy detail or over-explain here, as from the gameplay itself, I'm sure you can draw most of the same conclusions I'm going to make. Let me just list mechanics in Mr. Sun's Hatbox when in a run. Move left and right, jump up, jump down, shoot, throw, capture, equip, and loot. Now, in a run in Ballpit, you can just move left and right and shoot. This is the biggest fundamental change, which I believe led Ballpit to be a much bigger commercial success than Mr. Sun's Hatbox. The core fundamentals of roguelike progression, in my opinion, is just as great and moreish in Mr. Sun's Hatbox as in Ballpit. So the huge simplification of mechanical gameplay has to be a big factor. The significant reduction in options in mechanical gameplay for players, now of course there is a ton of strategy with the minute-to-minute gameplay in Ballpit, is then bolstered by the increase in options when the game is paused and around your in-run progression. When you want to get new items in Mr. Sun's Hatbox, for example, mid-run, you are opening chests or taking weapons off enemies in the middle of the fray, and there is significantly less options mid-run to really build on that progression. In Ballpit, you are presented those options again whilst the game is paused, and there are many more avenues and ways to progress in ways that you want, and you make all of these decisions without having to worry about mechanical input. This to me is again a softening of a similar roguelike progression designed purposefully for a more wide commercial audience, which again of course works exceedingly well for Ballpit. Now regarding specifically the commercial question, we can dive deep into art or marketing and a bunch of other things, as they are a huge factor. But, well, that isn't my wheelhouse. My wheelhouse is game design, which is often not regarded quite as highly in terms of how it impacts commercial success, which is understandable. However, I would like to point to why I do think it's a huge deal for Ballpit, specifically relating to getting that marketing support from a publisher. When Sun was developing Mr. Sun's Hatbox, he did get a publishing deal with Raw Fury, according to a Bloomberg article with Jason Schreier. In that same article, he mentioned how he started looking for a publisher for Ballpit, and he got many more offers and better offers. Everyone wanted to be the ones that published Ballpit. Now the reason being the obvious return on ROI, so the combination of low dev costs but high potential for sales, was seen as incredibly low risk for potentially incredibly high gain. And the one thing that publishers had to go off to make this assessment was the game's design. If the game design wasn't clearly incredible, but also very well suited for a mass market, as I've said before, Mr. Sun's Hatbox was also incredibly good game design, but not as well suited for a mass market, then the reaction from publishers wouldn't have nearly been as strong. The point I've been trying to make with this video is, firstly, it's great to be able to actually practically see the lessons learned between two games made by the same developer, but secondly, you can still make incredibly wacky and personal games, but still design it for a wider audience. And in doing so, you can make a game that is critically acclaimed, but also make a bunch of money at the same time, which I'm sure every indie dev is after. So when looking at both of these games, if you are making your own game at the moment, maybe take a step back. If there are systems or mechanics that are a bit prickly or a bit hard to understand, or could be simplified but not in a way that's detrimental to the game and preferably actually beneficial, then just consider looking at those and maybe diving deeper into their design and maybe making a change and then playtesting it. This right here is a classic example of keep it simple stupid, and honestly I can't think of a better one. Thanks for watching, hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, please make sure to be subscribed to be notified when I upload my next video. Don't forget to leave a like so other people who might like this video can see it, and keep on keeping on.